The moment my brother-in-law pointed at me from across the candlelit table and told 7 strangers I was picking up his tab, I felt something cold and final click into place behind my eyes. Not anger, not embarrassment, clarity. I set down my champagne glass. I straightened my jacket, and I smiled the exact same smile I use right before I close a deal that was never going to end in anyone's favor but mine. I manage financial audits for one of the top 3 accounting firms in the state. When a Fortune 500 company suspects fraud in their own ranks, they call my team. I spend my days following paper trails through swamps of deliberate deception. I find the lie buried underneath another lie, and I do it without raising my voice once. People assume that because I am young, because I am a woman, because I smile when I walk into a room, that I must be easy to manipulate. My brother-in-law had been operating under that assumption for 3 years. That Friday night at Meridian, the most exclusive private dining restaurant in our city, he finally ran out of runway. His name does not matter. I will call him what he is, my brother-in-law, my husband's younger brother, 31 years old, chronically unemployed, perennially convinced the world owed him a shortcut. He called himself a music producer, which in practice meant he spent his days in his mother's basement tweaking beats no one had ever paid to hear, and his nights convincing people that his next project was about to blow up. He drove a leased BMW he could not afford, wore sneakers that cost more than his rent, and had borrowed money from my husband so many times, I stopped keeping count after the 5th time he swore it was the last. That Friday was supposed to be my night. I had spent 2 years fighting for a senior director position at my firm, working 70-hour weeks, flying to depositions in cities I barely had time to Google, and quietly building a reputation that finally made the partners take notice. The promotion came through on a Tuesday. By Friday, my husband had made a reservation at Meridian, a restaurant that required a 6-week wait list, and where the tasting menu started at $400 per person. He reserved the private garden room, 10 seats, for our actual guests, my 2 closest colleagues, my best friend and her husband, my parents, his parents. That was it. That was the entire list. I wore the black dress I had been saving since last Christmas. My husband brought me peonies. We arrived first, and the maitre d' walked us through a corridor of warm amber light to a room that smelled like jasmine and aged wood, with a table set in white linen and crystal so thin you could see the candlelight refracted through the stems. Noah, our 3-year-old, was safely home with a babysitter. This was adult time, my time. The first car I did not recognize pulled up to the valet at 7:45. My brother-in-law walked in wearing his newest sneakers, a jacket with the tags still visibly tucked into the collar, and behind him came a woman I had never seen before, then another man, then 2 more people, and then a 5th stranger who walked in already filming the room on his phone. My brother-in-law swept into the private garden room like he owned the deed to it, arms wide, grinning at me like he had just done me a favor by showing up. "Surprise," he said. "I brought the crew. You're celebrating, right? The more the merrier." My mother-in-law looked up from her menu, and I watched the blood drain from her face in real time. His crew. 5 people none of us had ever met, now pulling up chairs, already picking up menus, already commenting on the wine list. The woman next to him leaned into his shoulder and started taking pictures of the crystal. The man with the phone had not stopped filming since he walked in. My husband caught my eye across the table. His jaw was tight. He gave me the smallest, most pained shake of his head that said, "I did not know. I knew he did not." That was the only reason I stayed seated. My brother-in-law dropped into the chair between my father and one of his uninvited guests, grabbed the menu, and looked straight at me with that smile he uses when he has already decided the answer is yes, before anyone has been asked the question. "You're good for this, right?" he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Big promotion. Big night. Family celebrates together. That's what tonight is about." He turned to the man filming and pointed at me. "This is my sister-in-law. She just made senior director. She's treating us all tonight." The man nodded at the camera, like this was a done deal. I looked at my brother-in-law for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for him to see that my smile had not moved, which is always the moment people who underestimate me start to feel something they cannot immediately name. "Order whatever you'd like," I said pleasantly. "I'm sure you'll figure out the bill." He laughed. He actually laughed, and turned back to the menu. My mother-in-law appeared at my elbow so fast she must have been waiting for the moment the conversation ended. She gripped my wrist with both hands, her rings pressing into my skin, and she steered me toward the corridor outside the garden room, with the focused urgency of a woman trying to contain a gas leak. "Please," she said the instant we were out of earshot. Her voice was low and frantic. "I know he should not have done this. I know. But you know how he is. He just gets excited. He wanted to be part of your night. If you make a scene, it is going to ruin everything. And your in-laws are here, and your colleagues are watching, and you do not want to be the person who—" "Who what?" I said. She blinked. "Who what?" I repeated, keeping my voice even and quiet, the way I keep it when I am interviewing a CFO who has been moving money for 2 years. Who insists that uninvited people pay for their own food? Who declines to buy dinner for 5 strangers at a $400 tasting menu on the night of her own promotion? "He's struggling," she whispered. "He is having a really hard time right now. He drove here in a leased BMW, I said. She opened her mouth. And he still owes us $900 from March, I said. And $400 from November. And I have the Venmo request to prove it. Her hands dropped from my wrist. I looked at her for a moment. This woman I had tried, genuinely tried, for 3 years to build something with. I thought about every dinner where I had quietly absorbed the cost of his presence. Every holiday where his drama had eaten the center of a room that was not about him. Every time I had bitten down on what I actually wanted to say because I was trying to be the bigger person, the gracious one, the one who kept the peace. The only time you call me family, I said quietly, is when you need me to absorb a cost. I walked back into the garden room. My firm maintains a contract with Meridian for client dinners. We route 8 to 12 corporate events through that restaurant per year. The general manager, a composed and precise woman I will call by her title, had greeted me personally when we arrived. I found her now at the host station, reviewing a seating chart, and I asked her quietly if we could speak for 60 seconds near the service alcove. I did not dramatize it. I did not explain family dynamics or ask for sympathy. I simply told her that the 5 individuals who had arrived uninvited were to be separated onto their own check, that nothing was to be authorized against my account or my firm's account for their table, and that if there were any complications with payment at the end of the evening, the restaurant had my direct number. She understood immediately. She had worked in hospitality long enough to recognize the architecture of what was happening without needing the blueprints. When I walked back to the table, I was calm, the way the surface of a lake is calm right before you understand how deep it goes. The tasting menu unfolded over the next 2 hours. My actual guests, the people I had invited, the people who had shown up to celebrate me, were warm and generous and funny. My colleague told the story of the first time I had walked into a deposition room and made a partner twice my age sit up straighter simply by asking one question. My best friend made a toast that made my mother cry in the good way. My husband held my hand under the table. On the other end of the long table, my brother-in-law ordered with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. A bottle of the Reserve Burgundy at $380. The Wagyu supplement. Cheese courses for all 5 of them. His guest with the camera ordered 2 cocktails before the first course arrived and asked the server if they did bottle service. They did not. My brother-in-law did not look at a price once. By the time the dessert course arrived, he had leaned back in his chair, with the posture of a man who felt the evening had gone exactly as planned. He was laughing loudly, doing most of the talking, performing for his guests. The woman next to him was posting something on her phone. The man with the camera had taken no fewer than 40 videos. The leather check presenter arrived at their end of the table at 10:15. I watched my brother-in-law reach for it with the lazy, unhurried confidence of a man who assumed it was going elsewhere. He flipped it open, and then he was very still. He looked up at me. I was looking at him. "There's been a mistake," he said to the server. "This should be on one tab with my sister-in-law." The server was professional and calm. "I'm sorry, sir." The account holder requested separate checks at the beginning of the evening. "Your total is $1,140. $1,140. He laughed. A high, pressurized sound. "She's joking. Call your manager." The general manager appeared in under 90 seconds. She was polite, unruffled, and absolutely immovable. She confirmed what the server had said. She explained that the arrangement had been made at the request of the primary reservation holder, who was a long-standing account client of the restaurant. She told him she would be happy to process his payment when he was ready. My brother-in-law looked at me again. The performance was gone. What was underneath it was not anger exactly. It was the particular panic of someone whose entire scaffolding had just been kicked out from under them in front of an audience. "You're really doing this," he said. "Uninvited guests pay their own way," I said. I turned back to my dessert. He produced a card. The server took it. I watched the transaction process from across the table. I watched the way his shoulders shifted when the server came back and murmured something low and private. He produced a second card. Then he leaned over to the woman next to him and said something I couldn't hear, and I watched her expression go from relaxed to unimpressed in the span of about 4 words. The man with the camera lowered his phone for the first time all night. 2 of his guests put down small amounts of cash and excused themselves with the stiff politeness of people who have just decided this is no longer their problem. The woman who had been next to him all night opened her own wallet, calculated what she owed for her specific plates, paid it, and left without saying goodbye to him. Within 15 minutes, my brother-in-law and one remaining guest were sitting at a table strewn with empty glasses and unfinished cheese plates, trying to reconcile $1,140 between 2 declined cards and whatever cash they had scraped together in their pockets. My mother-in-law, who had not said a word for the last 45 minutes, stood up quietly and took her coat from the back of her chair. My husband and I were the last of our real guests to leave. I hugged my mother at the door. I thanked the general manager personally. I pressed my heels into the cool marble of the lobby and felt, for the first time in longer than I could immediately measure, like the air around me was entirely my own. I assumed it was over. Desperation makes people do things that look, in hindsight, completely unhinged. At 6:47 the following morning, my home security app sent a notification to my phone. Motion detected. Back gate. I sat up in bed and opened the camera feed. My brother-in-law was standing at the back gate of our property, wearing the same jacket as the night before, trying to work the latch. When the gate didn't open, he moved to the side fence. When the fence alarm triggered, he stopped, looked directly at the camera mounted on the corner of our garage, and then continued trying to find a way in. I had changed the gate code 3 months ago, after he had shown up unannounced twice in 1 week, both times claiming he just wanted to talk to my husband. My husband had not been home either time. He had been the only one home, alone in our kitchen, both times. I had not told my husband I changed the code because I did not want to have that conversation about his brother until I had something more concrete to say. Now I had a 6:47 a.m. timestamp on a high-definition camera feed. I tapped the speaker icon on my phone. "I can see you," I said. He froze. "I changed the locks," I said. "I changed the gate code. I changed the garage keypad. I did all of that before last night, because I already knew what you were going to do this morning. The safe in my office has a biometric lock, and the code was never the same number you watched me enter 2 months ago." There was a very long silence from the other side of the gate. "You let this get out of hand," he finally said. His voice cracked somewhere in the middle of it. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed me in front of people who matter to my career. You had no idea what last night meant. What was riding on it. Do you know who was at that table? Do you know what you cost me?" "I know exactly what I cost you," I said. $1,140 that you owed the minute you sat down. You could have just paid it. "I'm going to give you 60 seconds to walk back to your car," I said. "After that, I'm going to call our security company and report an attempted entry. They will contact local non-emergency dispatch. I have the camera footage already backed up to the cloud. It is timestamped and it is very clear." 40 seconds of silence. Then the sound of footsteps walking away. I put my phone down on the nightstand, and I lay there in the quiet of my own bedroom, in my own house, listening to my husband breathe next to me. And I felt the specific, clean stillness of someone who has just stopped carrying weight they were never supposed to be carrying in the first place. The fallout did not arrive all at once. It came in increments over the following weeks, the way structural damage makes itself known slowly after the initial event. My husband called his brother that afternoon. It was not a short call. My husband is a measured, patient person, and he had extended more patience to his brother than I had ever asked him to, more than his brother deserved by any reasonable accounting. But when my husband came out of the home office after that call, something in his face had reorganized itself into something quieter and more settled. He told me his brother had tried to frame the previous night as me overreacting. He said he had listened to the full explanation, asked 3 questions, and then told his brother that if he came to our property again without being invited, he would be the one calling the police. His parents were harder. My mother-in-law called me twice in the week after. The first call was the one I expected. The version where she explained that her son was struggling, where she asked me to understand the pressure he was under, where she used the word family approximately 11 times in 8 minutes. I let her finish. Then I said, clearly and without heat, that I would not be revisiting the subject of what happened at the restaurant, that I bore no ill will toward anyone, and that I wished her a good evening. The second call was different. She called on a Sunday. She was quieter than I had ever heard her. She said she had been thinking about what I said in the corridor that night. She said she did not have an answer for it. She said she was sorry that the word family had become something that only moved in one direction when it came to me. It was not a full apology, but it was the first time in 3 years that she had acknowledged what the dynamic between us actually was, and I am honest enough to say that it meant something to me, even if I held it carefully and at some distance. My brother-in-law texted my husband 6 weeks later. He had found an actual position, entry-level at a production company, coordinating logistics for studio sessions. He was not calling it his big break. He did not mention the restaurant. He did not mention the morning at the back gate. He asked if we wanted to get dinner sometime, just the 3 of us, somewhere casual. My husband showed me the text. I thought about it for about 30 seconds. "Tell him we'll plan something," I said, "after he pays back what he owes us." My husband smiled at me in a way that told me we were going to be fine. The $1,140 he paid at Meridian, the money he and his guests scrambled together from declined cards and borrowed cash and the dregs of whatever dignity they had left at that table, that amount is currently sitting in a dedicated savings account. I opened the following Monday. I labeled it clearly. It is the beginning of my daughter's college fund. We found out I was pregnant the week after the promotion came through. I had not told anyone yet except my husband. I think about that sometimes. I think about the fact that the money a grown man tried to take from me to fund a performance for people who abandoned him the moment his card declined is now quietly compounding interest for a child who does not yet know her name, who will one day sit in a classroom somewhere and not have to worry about how it's being paid for. That is what protecting your own means, in practice. It does not always look dramatic. It does not always feel like justice in the moment you are standing in the corridor outside a private dining room telling your mother-in-law you are done swallowing poison. Sometimes it just looks like a line item in a savings account that says, "This family, this specific one I built, is not available for exploitation." I know some of you watching this right now are in the middle of your own version of that restaurant corridor. You are standing there with someone's hand on your arm and their tears in your face and the word family being used the way it always gets used, like a password that unlocks your compliance. You are wondering if setting the limit is worth the fallout. You are wondering if you are allowed to protect your own night, your own money, your own professional milestone, without being the villain in someone else's story. Here is what I know from the other side of it. You do not need their permission to separate the checks. You do not need them to understand it, agree with it, or forgive you for it. The people who call you selfish for protecting yourself were never protecting you to begin with. They were protecting their own access to your resources and calling it love. There are 3 things I carry out of that night that I want to leave with you. The first is this. Entitlement is always on a timeline. People who help themselves to what is yours are operating on borrowed time. And the longer they go unchecked, the more they will take, and the more they will take, the more catastrophically they will land when the check finally arrives. You are not being cruel by making it arrive on schedule. You are just stopping the loan. The second is that documentation is not paranoia. Before that night at Meridian, I had backed up every Venmo request, every unanswered text about repayment, every camera notification, from the 2 unannounced visits. I had changed the codes and noted the dates. I did not do any of that because I was looking for a fight. I did it because I had been a financial auditor long enough to know that the people who say trust me the loudest are the ones most likely to need a paper trail later. The third is the hardest one. Sometimes the most expensive thing you can do for your own life is keep absorbing the cost of someone else's. The money I did not spend that Friday night at Meridian is the least of it. The real accounting is the years I spent editing myself to make room for someone who never once made room for me. Stop paying that bill. The interest is not worth it. Have you ever had to draw the line with someone your family expected you to keep covering for? Have you ever had to choose between being liked by people who were using you and being free? Tell me in the comments. Because if you are sitting there thinking you are the only one holding an unpaid tab with someone's name on it, I promise you are not alone. If this gave you something to hold on to today, subscribe. I'm building something here for the women who are done being the bigger person, for people who have never once tried to be bigger themselves. My name is Rachel. My tab is closed. But let's be honest about something. Because this story is not as simple as a bad guy and a good ending. And you deserve the full picture. For a long time, I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself that paying the smaller bills, absorbing the smaller costs, overlooking the smaller takes, was the generous thing to do. What I did not want to look at directly was that I was not actually being generous. I was being conflict avoidant, and I had dressed it up in the language of grace to make it easier to live with. Because here is what I know now that I did not let myself know then. Every time I paid a bill that was not mine to pay, I taught him exactly what I was worth. I taught him that my limits were theoretical. I taught him that the word no was always negotiable if he applied enough family-shaped pressure. Behavioral psychologists call this the path of least resistance trap. When someone in a close system, a family, a marriage, a workplace, repeatedly rewards boundary violations by removing the consequence, they do not teach the violator to stop. They teach them that the consequence is not real. They teach them to push harder the next time, because the next time, the consequence might disappear again. You are not keeping the peace when you absorb someone's entitlement. You are teaching them that your peace is available for purchase. What changed for me was not a single moment of clarity. It was the accumulation of small reckonings, the 3rd unanswered Venmo request, the 2nd unannounced arrival, the particular expression on my brother-in-law's face when he said, "You're good for this, right?" With the relaxed certainty of someone who already knew the answer. There was no urgency in his face. There was no awareness that he was asking for something he had not been given. He was stating a fact about how my resources worked, and the reason he could state it as a fact is that I had spent 3 years making it one. So I want to say this clearly to anyone who is watching this and recognizing their own version of that table. You are not weak for having let it go on as long as it has. You are not stupid. You are probably trying to be kind, and kind people in unkind dynamics learn, slowly and painfully, that kindness without structure is just an open door. You are allowed to close the door. You are allowed to install a deadbolt. You are allowed to back up the camera footage and change the gate code before the situation requires it, because protecting yourself in advance is not the same as assuming the worst about someone. Sometimes it is just recognizing what has already been true for longer than you wanted to admit. The check will always come. The only question is who pays it. Make sure it's not always you.